Hi guys, I'm James McIntosh and welcome back to the Privett podcast. Today we will be looking at the behind the scenes at the club, someone who heads it all up, including being high up at the Southern League, working as a director for the league, as I'm joined by Craig Stainton. So sit back, relax and enjoy the episode. Craig, welcome to the podcast. Looking forward to the next hour ahead?
Yes, James, I'm looking forward to being quizzed by you.
Well, it should be a great hour and I'm really looking forward to it. And Craig, what better way to start with yesterday? It was an unfortunate loss, but working as a director for the Southern League, it really just shows how diverse and quality this league is. A team at the bottom of the league who hasn't won all season, they go to a playoff pushing side, away being in mind, and they pull off a good result, and just showing how diverse and quality this league is now.
Yeah, and I think it shows that everybody in the league is capable of beating everybody else, as results have already shown. So who knows who will be in the relegation spot and who knows who will be promoted. I feel that the team winning the league won't be one of the teams that is expected.
Well, you said it a bit about it there, but I feel like this league is you can't predict it this season. So last season, Chesham, they ran out clear favourites, but it doesn't look like today is going to be the same case. It just looks like there's a mix of teams who could definitely be up there for it. And have you enjoyed this season so far overall? Just how it's a mix. We've got a new squad, really completely new, I would say, from last season. And how have you enjoyed it this season?
I think it's been exciting up to this point. I think Joe and Pat and Mark have put a team together that has achieved what it's achieved in the FA Cup, which has put the club again on the map. We've had lots of comments from people about winning those games at Gloucester and Oxford, and I think, the team deserve great credit for that.
Well, I do really think it's going to be a great season. But Craig, it's time to return back to yourself. And can you just take me back? I'm not sure how many years exactly, because I'm not going to guess your age, but just take me back when you were a boy growing up, and how did you originally get into the game?
That'll be down to my dad's fault. So in 1973, my granddad was involved on the committee at Bognor, and basically from an early age grew up around non-league football. I was the mascot at Bognor for 5 years and was run out as a little boy with the team. And while my mum and dad and my granddad were all involved in the club, forming my formative years, growing up with people like Jack Pearce, was always sat in our front room. And so that was my first involvement, and it then carried on through my dad moving clubs and being involved in both the professional game and non-league game, and me being in the background playing the game. My career was cut short with a double compound fracture of the leg, and back in 1986 it was totally different treatments than they are today, which meant the end of my career, having I'd had the experience and lucky to work with Alan Ball as my manager and the coach at Portsmouth and lots of other people, which meant I went into another side of football. And at the time, I was asked to join the management team of Vince Allaire and Billy Gilbert at Waterlooville, and became part of the management team there that went on to win Southern League trophies. And that was my background, really. And from there, was always on Dad's shoulder. And when he was involved in clubs doing various jobs and roles, I would be in the background learning off him and learning off other people.
Well, Craig, that's a really interesting start. And to be fair, I never knew you played football professionally. You said about you played in under Alan Ball there. So was that the hope at one point to go professional and maybe make a life as a footballer?
I was a youth team player and a youth team squad member, and it never materialised for me because I had a double compound fracture break. So before I was able to take any real professional terms, I didn't. I did play a few games after the break at non-league level, and actually came to Gosport in 1988 on loan.
Wow.
One of the coaches at the time was a guy called Stuart Avery. He came and took me on loan for a few weeks, and I played one game at Andover. And but my leg was never capable of taking the training to play at that level. So just played some lower league, non-league football at various places.
And it's interesting you mentioned about how you were always born into non-league almost. So you said about your dad that he heavily worked with a lot of non-league clubs, one of them being Bognor. So you were brought up around it. And I would say really it must have taken the last 5 years. I'd say especially since COVID, where the non-league is really trajected and it's come into this massive scene. But beforehand, I wouldn't imagine it's nowhere near as big as it was today. And what was it like non-league? I don't know, 40 years ago, let's say.
I think it was as big, James. I think there wasn't as many clubs playing locally, certainly in the early 80s in the area. You know, Gosport, Fareham, Waterlooville were the senior clubs. You know, someone like Havant was much lower in the pyramid, but those three clubs, Gosport, Fareham, Waterlooville, were all vying to be the top side in the Southern League in those days.
And have you noticed, you mentioned about your dad, he obviously got you into non-league, and it's almost like we link back to this idea a lot of Gosport being this family club. And do you recognise a lot of the people from where you were youngsters still attending Gosport games and maybe still going to the Bognor games where you met fans from there?
You know, I still visit Nigel Lane on a regular basis. The manager there is a really close friend of mine. And I do see people, unfortunately, a lot of the people that I grew up with in those places are there in Jubilee Park and Waterlooville are no longer with us. I'm getting old, and those people were always old when I was young. So I do see a few faces. I'm still in contact with a few faces at those clubs, and yeah, they're very happy memories of my formative years.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about that later, but I want to return back to Havant. So you said about after your double leg fracture, you joined Havant and Waterlooville, and you said about this was your managerial role. So how did this come along?
It wasn't Havant and Waterlooville in those days. The two clubs were separate.
Oh,
So,
were they? Okay,
so
carry on, sir.
it was Waterlooville Football Club in those days. And at the time, Dad was the vice chairman at Waterlooville, and I ended up playing some games in the youth team and in the reserve side, and I was around. And then when I decided I couldn't play any longer, Billy and Vince, I'd known for a few years since they were at Fratton Park, and they were putting together, they were both player managers, and they needed people, 2 or 3 guys off the pitch to do all the managerial stuff and coaching and things like that. And I was lucky enough, they asked me and became part of that team. And it was a fantastic experience and a fantastic time for that club. Yeah, and it was an experience of a lifetime to work with players of that quality that were going into their managerial stage for the first time. And at the time, Waterlooville were probably the senior club in the area, with some fantastic and all-time greats of non-league football in our area.
Well, you mentioned about how you really enjoyed it, and I would imagine it was a stark contrast from playing. And did you enjoy this side of the game, coaching players rather than playing yourself? Maybe you were coaching players that you could see in yourself, because I know a lot of the non-league players, they were former academy players that had suffered serious injuries. They were let go of the bigger clubs, almost falling out of love with football, and then they join non-league, and it's almost where they rekindle their love. Or I know a lot of the players, at least in today's society, still kind of do a similar story with non-league.
I think the game has changed. From those years, it was more about the family. It was more about the drinking buddies. It was a very much more social game. It was, you know, you were in it for the social side as well. The money wasn't nowhere near what it is today. And it was, you got together with a group of people 3 times a week and you had some real fun, you know, and wherever we were playing in those days, and we were travelling the country in those days in the Southern League, we were going to Birmingham, you know, Burton Albion, Leicester. It wasn't as it is now. You know, we were on long coach trips with some real personalities, you know, and a lot of those friends are still my friends, and, you know, they were great times.
Well, it sounds like a great time. And it'd be nice if we could get a little trip up to Birmingham, maybe in the FA Trophy this year. I've always fancied doing a longer away trip. I mean, the best we really get is Merthyr, but yeah, that's still a far one. But it's like you were saying, you did a lot of off-field management, but I suppose the biggest instructor really that helped you grow as most off the pitch was your dad. So you mentioned how he was the vice president, and then obviously where you are today, you're the club secretary. And I suppose a lot of the skills you've picked up for what you use in an everyday life at Gosport, you learnt from your dad.
I was very lucky growing up. I got to experience both non-league and professional football at a close quarters. I saw things that many people would wish and would be their boyhood dreams. I got to meet people that would be boyhood dreams, but a lot of those were non-league for me. I saw people like Stuart Pearce, like Vinnie Jones starting their non-league career. I remember Wilston coming to Waterlooville in the late 70s with a young Vinnie Jones in, so you grow to see these people. And many years later, when Dad was at Portsmouth, we went back to Leeds and there was Vinnie Jones standing in the bar and we had a long conversation, ended up going for a few beers with him that night with Vince, who was there as well. So football community is a very close-knit community. You never know what's around the corner when you need your little black book.
And you mentioned about the black book there, and I know football is all about contacts, and you've alluded to it a lot already in this episode. And I imagine these contacts, they helped you get the job at Gosport eventually.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say it was. I didn't have to apply for the job. When Ian and Dad came into the club in 2017, I was asked to come in for a short time to try and sort the admin out. That was 7 years ago. When we came into the club was in a mess, to put it politely. Admin probably had gone missing for a few years, not for anybody's personal fault or anything else. It just, the volume of work you have to do as a club secretary, it is a full-time job, but on a volunteer basis.
Well, you mentioned about it being a full-time job, and like you were just saying there, the club when you joined, it was really in a rough place financially, and it was just, it wasn't a great place to be at the time. I know a lot of the players were leaving, and you were thrown in the deep end, but I suppose it gave you the best education as soon as you joined in.
I mean, at that point, I think for all three of us that came in, it was a bit of an eye-opener, and rest assured, the club would not be here now if it wasn't for the chairman and what he's done both for the finances of the club, but also the club's growth. So I think most of the credit will go to Ian, and I will always be that person who pushes that forward, because my job is to support Ian. My job is to help Ian. Before my dad passed away, he would be at the club every day. And he would be doing a lot of the things I'm now doing, which is not just admin roles. It's talking to people. It's talking to big sponsors. It's it's a right diversity of things. But it didn't fear me, because I felt I'd learned everything I could learn off, in my eyes, the best there was.
Exactly that. And you mentioned about how Ian, he came in, and realistically, he was probably the best person to come in for that situation. Obviously, he more or less was the man that did save Portsmouth Football Club as well. So being another big team that he has saved in the past. But when you were having these conversations, I would imagine you and your dad, you were a big reason for helping sort out Ian coming to the club, because I know beforehand there was another financial backer who was linked with coming to the club, but it ended up all falling apart along those lines I've read into, and I've heard other people, they were linked with buying a club. But when you heard about Ian joining, I suppose you knew that was the right move straight away.
Well, luckily I've known Ian for a long time. When Dad was at Portsmouth, Ian was one of the big supporters there back in the 80s and 90s. Actually, the family have known Ian and his family for a very long time. When Ian was chairman at Portsmouth, he was kind enough. He would invite us along. He would ask Dad for some advice, and they were very close, and they had formed a very close bond. And you're right, Ian did save Portsmouth Football Club. He doesn't get the recognition that he deserves for that role in it, but the people that were close to him and close to that football club know what he actually did.
And then speaking still on the same note of Ian, he brought along this consortium, and I would imagine you, your dad, Ian, you all led these key principles in a way that was ultimately is still helping Gosport today and still function. And I would imagine at the start it must have been so hard with the club. They weren't doing well on the pitch at all. I read that in 2017 to 18 they finished second to last. So I would imagine it would have been a pain bringing in players, but sorting out sponsorships as well. Just tell us how hard that was trying to fix all sponsorships when the team they're not doing great. So why would a business want to sponsor a team? And once again, I suppose you're reliant on the local links really that are going to help the club rather than the bigger links that only want to sponsor for when the team's doing good.
I think again, the club was in a mess, both on and off the field. However, what I would say about all those players that did play for the club in those early years were amazing people. At the moment, we still have one of those players at the club in Harry Medway, who at the time was the captain, and he was outstanding at the time. As you say, difficult to get players in, didn't want to be beaten by what we were getting beaten 7-6 most weeks. But people like Harry inspired, some of my favourite games were in that period of time where we got a point or we got 3 points or we might have got one clean sheet in the whole season, but actually that meant the world.
Well, I suppose after getting one big result, like you were just saying there, it probably did mean everything. And I suppose when you're doing well, like we are at the moment, it's becoming a norm. But like then, it was much bigger at the time. And you did also mention about you needed leaders, one of them being Harry Medway. And I suppose it must be so hard to change the trajectory, bringing in these better players. And how do you shift a club from being in that sort of form to maybe pushing up the league, like a lot of Gosport fans wanted, returning back to the conference one day?
I think a lot of that is done off the field as well. The visual stuff is on the field, is on the grass. People want to, those 11 men that start the game wearing the shirt, that's what people see. But before that happens, to make that happen is an enormous amount of work that goes on by numerous people. Through that period, the first game that we were in charge of the club or running things at the club was Salisbury at home. We had 126 people in the crowd that day. So again, that's where, and that was a local derby. So you can see where the crowds have come from too. And that again is a lot of work that's gone off the field, as well as the success happening on the field. But the success on the field wouldn't happen without the success off the field, and vice versa.
Well, you mentioned about having to have that positive correlation. And one thing that I have found so interesting about this year, particularly in Gosport, is how obviously these sources of income they can affect a football club and how it's important for a club not to be so reliant on one backing. So obviously I've known in the past Ian, he has massively helped this club and he's been the main funder for the club. But this season we have introduced this new team. It's called the 1944 Club. I know you've recently signed up for it, but it's a great organization where fans they help fund the team rather than having this one backer, and having these sources of income coming in, it means the club is never going to die, and probably something that all teams, at least all non-league teams, should look at introducing. And it's a great organisation, the 1944 Club.
It is a great organisation, and we are very lucky as a club. The 1944 Club, is now contributing to the running costs of the club, which is fantastic. As you're seeing, they bought footballs, they've helped with coach travel, they're planning on doing lots of other good things. But also with that is the supporters club as well, who again, and they deserve credit because they've had to reform from a bad time in the club past. But again, they are making a massive step forward in contributing to the costs of running a football club, and especially our football club, and the work that's needed on the ground, the work, so both areas and both sets of people, and there's a lot of crossover in those clubs, let me tell you, they deserve massive credit.
And I think someone else who does deserve a lot of credit is the volunteers here at Gosport. And we have so many volunteers, a lot of them being fans. But I want to speak a lot about the volunteers at the club as well. So at the start, I remember you saying their fans, it's great because they had a laugh at football games. They used to have a chance at talking. And I suppose these voluntary roles, they're going to boost their mental health as well. A lot of people think it's one-sided where volunteers come in and they help the club. That's really the main function. But volunteers, they also get a lot out of it now as well. It gives them a chance to chat with friends. And I know recently, particularly in mental health, we've seen a lot of adverts in football where people, they just don't get talking. But when you're doing these roles, you're going to be talking to fans and it just gets you talking. And volunteers, once again, it's just a great thing.
As you're reading my program notes most weeks, I'll be thanking those volunteers. You know, they are unsung heroes for the club. You know, I can't really explain to people how much work our volunteer team, and that is volunteers that come in every day and work on the ground to make sure it's in a fit state for everybody to visit. It is the stewards, it is the gatemen, it is the guys that come and help repair the pitch. You know, it's an endless list of people that come in on a daily basis and help the club. On top of that, you know, you have people in positions of safeguarding officer, welfare officer. All those people are volunteers, and the club would not survive without those volunteers because of the cost elements of having people in positions. So again, we are luckier than most. When I go around in my other role and I visit other clubs and I talk to other clubs, they're amazed that we can get that many people to come in. So again, the people of Gosport have bought into the project of the football club and what it means to those people. I would never be able to thank them enough, and I could spend all day talking about them, thanking them, but actually a lot of them very shy people as well. You know, it's a passion for them. You know, a special mention, you know, could go to every one of them, and I think it's really unfair to single any of them out because they're all an integral part of how our club runs.
Well, exactly that. And I think volunteers, it's dual wielding, so they get a lot out of it. The club gets a lot out of it. And another point that has really interested me, I'm sure you know a lot about it as well, involving the volunteering point, is volunteers, they now get a lot of stuff. So I think it was a safeguarding role. I can't remember now. It was recently anyway. We were advertising this role. But with this role, the club, they paid for all the qualifications needed to be able to do it. And I know a lot of young people in particular, they want to get straight into, like me, for example, we want to get into the media role and they think they're going to join Pompey straight away or Arsenal straight away. But realistically, joining the non-league, it offers great experience. So Gosport, I've learned how to do all the media at the club. I've learned things I wouldn't have been able to do at bigger clubs. And now non-league, it's been seen as a bigger playground. And just, it's a great chance to grow if you're one of the youngsters.
As you know, the volunteer group that you sit in with every home game, you know, inside the press box, most people in the ground won't see those people. You know, we all know about Jeremy, we all know about Paul, but do we know about James? Do we know about Connor? You know, and the work that you guys do help grow the club. You're all volunteers, you know, but it's a stepping stone. But, you know, if you look and you talk to Jeremy, all the people that he's had within the press box over the years that have gone on bigger, better things, it's a starting point for anybody in any position they want to do. There's a big push at the FA around safeguarding and the changes in the rules that are coming in at the end of this season around safeguarding for clubs at our level. All those things, we need volunteers because we can't, no club at this level can survive with the people they're going to need by paying people.
Well, definitely that. And I think volunteers, they're exactly showcasing the great parts of just non-league in general. And one question I did have, I suppose it probably does link very nicely, is the pandemic. So after the pandemic, did you see a noticeable change with fans wanting to volunteer? And did you see a upwards spike in fans attending after the pandemic, with many people refusing to go to bigger teams and realizing just how good they have it on their doorstep, some of the local teams surrounding their local area?
I think for us, the community work club did, and again, I'm not going to name people. There was lots of volunteers. Even the players came in to help the Feed a Family project that Ian put into place. Those volunteers that were coming in through that helped grow the club, helped serve the community. After that had all happened, you know, a bit of community payback was let's go along to the football club. They fed us for 2 years, you know, and all those projects helped to that end game of growing a football club. This isn't just about football. This is about growing the football club within the community, and the community growing around the football club and understanding where the football club sits in the community. So for me, you know, I can remember the end of the period where there was no football. It was like, oh, how is this going to be relaunched? And I went to various meetings with the FA and engaging with all the clubs at our level, where they were trying to work out how they can help clubs, you know, but there was bigger things than football at the time. But I think what happened is, yes, you're right. People didn't want to go into those environments. We all remember the Cheltenham Racing Festival, where they kept it open and it spread like wildfire after it. And I think people were wary about going to the big stadiums and could look. We also didn't have the same restrictions. You know, people were allowed into non-league football before they were allowed back into the Premier games, in stadium games. So actually, it helped us in that scenario, because people came but had never been to Privett Park, for say, and actually experience the day they get, where all these volunteers and staff we have look after people, you know. So the welcome that people get also helped, but actually it gave us a chance to sell the club again, because people just wanted to get out and watch some football.
Well, I know a lot of clubs at the time, they folded. I think it was Bury who folded a similar time during COVID. And you mentioned about these volunteers. I would imagine they're the main reason why the club really stayed afloat during that time.
Well, again, you know, we had to furlough players like every other football club. You know, the furlough scheme was there, and we had to, all of the staff got furloughed, you know, because we had to. But again, through that period of time, most of this fell on Ian to keep the club running in what he needed to do. You know, so rest assured, when there was no football and when there was all these things going on, there still wasn't a lack of need for the football club to survive. We worked tirelessly through that period, as I said, the Feed a Family project, you know, but a football club still needs to be run.
Well, exactly that, yeah. Because I was going to say, you said about Feed a Family there, and do you think that also brought more fans to the club?
It's a community project, wasn't it? At the end of the day, it's about community and that's always been one of Ian's drivers. Is he wants to build this community club where people think it is part of the community, and he wants people to understand it's part of the community. That's one of his biggest drivers, is that this is a football club that belongs to the community, you know, and actually that gave us a chance to show that and show people. And after that, the gates did grow quickly, because people could see what we were doing in the community. It wasn't all about the old regime at Gosport. This was a new Gosport Borough Football Club, in effect.
Well, it's really interesting that, and how the club really changed motto. And I suppose another big element that you would have seen a huge transition in, it was 2023. So I know a few years that followed COVID, Gosport, they weren't exactly having the best time on the pitch. So you had a few mid-table finishes. I think it was the year before Pat and Joe joined. They weren't too great under Mark Mosley. But when Pat and Joe came in, once again, it was like this whole new revelation. And I suppose you would have worked closely with Pat and Joe from when they were at the academy. And did you have an instant idea that they were going to be a big hit at the club?
I think everybody realised that they were different. Probably a different way of putting it. That they were players that both could still play at the level we're playing at without any question. You know, they were both outstanding players for the club in their playing days for the club. But they saw their future in a different place. And actually, they did a fantastic job in the academy. They did a fantastic job when they went to Petersfield. And actually, probably everyone would say at the time, it was probably a little bit early for them to come into Gosport. But I think that was probably always the chairman's plan. He was looking at the future. These two guys are Gosport boys. You know, Pat is born and bred Gosport, in effect. He's lived here. Joe's played for the club for a long time. The fans love them as players, so it's a natural progression. You know, we've been through a period of time where we've had different managers in. Some of them, in fact, all of them, there wasn't a single person that I didn't enjoy working with, and they were all different. And actually, most of them did a good job at that period in time. But without those managers doing their job, Joe and Pat wouldn't have what they had at the start of last season. And I think there needs to be a bit of recognition around that. As fantastic as Joe and Pat have done, they weren't dealing with the same issues that Brian Vine had or Craig McAllister and Matt Tubbs were dealing with. You know, all of those people and managers had different circumstances than we have now to deal with. So I would always say that people like Sean Gale and that, they did their great job. Mark Mosley did the job he was brought in to do, kept the club up. So the football wasn't attractive, and it wasn't nowhere near as attractive as what Joe and Pat. But at the time, the club was struggling and needed his experience, and he did an outstanding job to keep us up. Again.
Carry on, sorry, Craig.
So, you know, Joe and Pat came in. Listen, they have done an amazing job. They are brilliant coaches. I watch their sessions. I think all the players enjoy their sessions because, you know, it's difficult. They're very young and they're signing players that are much older than them, but they earn the respect of those players very quickly.
And I think the point that really interested me most about that point there, you were obviously giving a lot of recognition to the former managers. And I think it's only right because, like you were saying there, without those former managers, we wouldn't have the club where we are today in the league. Obviously, Mark Mosley helped keep us up. But the biggest point that really interested me was about you saying how Ian brought Pat and Joe obviously in, Pat being a local Gosport boy. And when picking the managers, do you think that was the key reason why they were picked? Because they were Gosport local. So obviously they knew the club really well, but at the same time they have Gosport roots, so maybe it was the perfect appointment, and we're trying to once again link that community feel back with the club whilst also still trying to pluck good results on the pitch, which they were recognised by the academy.
I think that did help. However, the main reason they got the job is because they were the best two people for the job. And whatever anybody else, you know, there's lots of opinion floating around. Oh, they won't know this, they won't have done this. Actually, they proved everybody wrong in my eyes, you know, and actually we got to a playoff semi-final. Overachieving very quickly. The hardest job becomes now because you have to follow that, but they got the job on merit. You know, and I will always fight that they got the job on merit. There was lots of applications for jobs over the last 3 or 4 years at Gosport Borough Football Club. And some of these people that were applying for jobs were much higher up the pyramid than we were playing at the time. So it was a sought after position. Ian stuck his neck out in effect because it could have gone wrong, but actually, you know, they are the best people for the job. Yes, they have some local connection. Yes, they understand the club, but more importantly, most of the supporters knew them. So the buy-in was that these guys were ex-players, have done a fantastic job in the academy, have done a fantastic job with the youth team as well, which they were managing, and had gone away to Petersfield to learn their trade and done a fantastic job from there. At the time, could you name me a better local managers? Probably not.
No. Well, yeah, very interesting point there. And another very interesting and intriguing way of looking at it is, I remember my first time meeting Pat. He obviously helps very much with the social media, and he almost gave these clear instructions. He wanted the club, the social media output at least, to be as matching with the fans as possible. And I think the social media and what Pat and Joe have added, form-wise at least on the pitch, it's once again boosted the fans off the pitch as well. So I can't really comment because before I joined, I didn't really know what the atmosphere was like at Gosport. But since Pat and Joe have come in, I mean, it is just like being at a non-league Pompey game. You see flags flying, you see chants everywhere. I mean, I've even got my own chant, which is the weirdest thing out there. But have you noticed that since Pat and Joe have come in, once again, the mood around the stadium, it has really risen?
What they were able to establish very quickly, and also what they recognised was the fans. You know, I would say they're the hardest working managers we've had at the club. You know, they live, breathe it. They're messaging you all day long. They work incredibly hard. You know, I won't have anybody say they don't work hard. They don't prepare. They don't do their homework on other sides. You know, they've got scouts, and they're endlessly looking at football online. They work incredibly hard, probably the hardest workers that we've had, I would say. They also recognise the connection that the fans can give them. You know, if you look back to last year, we probably had 6 or 7 local players playing in the first team. Again, helps with establishing a recognition to local people. So again, they took that risk. Because actually, would some of those players be your first pick? But as great coaches, they improved the side. And they're still doing it now. If you look at players that have come into the club, are they better now than when they first joined? Yes. And I'll argue all of them that they'll do things now that they couldn't do, or last year that they couldn't do before they joined the club. You know, Rafa is a prime example. What they did for that man, and what they, with his hard work as well, they made him a better player.
Well, definitely that. And I think probably on the pitch, they were 2 of the best managers in the league now, easily considered, and definitely worth taking that risk. And I know, obviously, fans, they've massively risen, and it's all been a really good time at Gosport. And someone else who has done brilliant this season is yourself. And your work with Gosport has landed you a job with the Southern League as director. And can you just tell the fans a bit about that?
Yeah, so for 5 years, I've been chased to apply to do it. When the chairman of the Southern League passed away, Anthony, last year, we were good friends. When we went to Merthyr, we would always go out for a beer. And, you know, one of our last conversations was, I want you on the board. I need you on the board. And so it was just a natural stage that I joined the board. It is an interesting job. Again, it takes a few hours a week. I now run a mentoring scheme for all the clubs in the Southern League for admin and secretary things. And I have 9 clubs at the moment in the South, so South Premier and South, where I have weekly meetings with all these clubs. You know, there's a lot of other things you have to do. So there's lots of other meetings you go to. You're part of a national group of the 3 leagues, you know, that look after the corporates of the leagues. You know, so you're interacting with people from the Isthmian League, the Northern Premier League. In the last month, I've been to meetings in Banbury, Gloucester, London, you know, so it is interesting. And it is an honour. You know, I've been associated with the Southern League since 1973. So it is an honour. And I've known lots of the people that have held these positions before. And actually, someone once described me as the AGM of the Southern League as God's waiting room. But it is a fantastic group of people who are all associated with clubs within the Southern League who are trying to improve the non-league game for the Southern League clubs. The Southern League club is the oldest league in the country.
Oh, wow.
Southampton won it, Tottenham won it. If you're lucky enough to pick the league trophy up, you'll see Tottenham Hotspur on there. You'll see Southampton on there. You know, if you're lucky enough, I've got a winner's medal for the Southern Division and for the Bill Dello Cup, which is the League Cups, which we no longer play. But you know, there's lots of the oldest trophies in the country belong to the Southern League. So there's a lot of history in the Southern League. In my eyes, you're either a Southern League club or you're an Isthmian League club. You know, Gosport is a Southern League club. But it is an honour. But again, it is hard. It is a lot of work. And as last night, you know, I end up speaking as both as a director of Gosport Borough, but also as a director of the Southern League to oppositions. I'm helping Marlow off the field at the moment. So it's not a conflict of interest, but actually you have to separate the roles. You know, there's so many rules and regulations. When you're a new club to the league, we are the only league with an online system. We are suffering because the FA are bringing in all new rules and regulations around what we have to do before a game, what we have to do during a game, and you have to keep on top of that. So the mentoring scheme is that. So far this year, I've already organised the Southern League annual presentation weekend. So that's been another role that I seem to have found myself with. But like everything else, most of our board meetings that happen once a month in Gloucester, they're all about fining people.
Really? Well, to be fair, I bet you're a very busy man, Craig. And like you were just saying there, you do sound like you do a fair bit, to be fair. And I would imagine one that you must face some huge issues with Southern League at the moment. So I know there's a lot of controversy at the Premier League at the moment. So I'm not sure if you heard about La Liga, but they are currently planning. So I think it's Barcelona and Atletico Madrid. Rather than playing in Spain, they're going to be playing their game in Miami, and that's the current plan. But FIFA, they look like they're trying to block the move at the moment. And I suppose even at their lower leagues, when you hear clubs like the Premier League, they're forming this Super League, it's going to have a massive effect at the bottom of the league. And I suppose you know this really well, that if this ever did come into fruition, that they do play their games in foreign countries, it's going to ruin the football pyramid and ruin clubs like Gosport Borough.
I'm privy to a lot of information that I can't talk about, obviously, James. But actually, I'd love Gosport Borough to have to go and play a game in Miami.
That would be nice. I have to admit, that would be lovely. Maybe do it in the US. And I would imagine, though, another huge issue that I think all of football's really facing at the moment is money once again. The levels of clubs that are spending, even in our league. So I do remember 2-3 seasons ago, maybe it was AFC Portchester, they brought in Brett Pittman. I mean, even if you look at this league, AFC Tottenham, they splashed out massively on ex-Premier League Charlie Austin. And is this something else you talk about in your meetings? And is this something that you guys are maybe worried about, the amount that spending is going on around this level of the football pyramid? Because it's making it a very unfair balance. So someone like AFC Tottenham, they're almost paying to win, when in a few years down the line, it could haunt them and it could turn into a Pompey situation.
I think that's down to individual clubs. You know, they have to set their wage budgets and work within what those wage, and every club is different. As a league, you know, there's more pressing things than actually the playing budget, you know, so there's a big lean on ground grading this year, and all work has to be achieved by the end of March. Well, actually, the concern I have, or we've discussed, is, you know, clubs maybe not thinking about the longevity of their ground and the work they need, rather than what happens on the pitch. But there has to be a balancing act. All clubs are different. All clubs are different of what they can afford and what they can't afford. It's down, for me, it's about how do these clubs sustain the length of their club. You know, you could go and splash a load of money on a load of players, but what does it actually get you? And as you say, you're going back to Portchester. They spent all that money. They didn't get promoted.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't always work. You can have the largest budget. It doesn't always work. It didn't work last year. You know, so it's not always down to money. It's down to how the group of players that go out on the field every Saturday. It's about having a team. It's about not individuals. You know, I've always believed that you can pay one player a lot of money, but when you sit in that changing room and you look that person in the eye, does he give you as much as the guy that's earning next to nothing, but he goes out there and fights for that shirt? So I think when it comes to a league, we don't, you know, that's not really anything to do with us. And actually what happens at the top level will eventually feed down into hopefully more money coming down if they sell. But actually it's a long way off that yet. And I don't actually see our football association agreeing to that without a lot of changes.
Yeah, hopefully so. I mean, like I said, I love the current footballing pyramid, and I think really it just shouldn't be tampered with. And when going back to the AFC Tottenham game, I'm looking forward to it. I think we're going to have a good game against Tottenham. Looking forward to seeing Joe Morrison up against Charlie Austin. I think Joe Morrison, our backline, easily going to have it covered. So that would be a good one. So make sure to get your tickets for that one, Gosport fans. And returning back to Gosport, Craig, I mean, it's been a topsy-turvy season, I want to say, in the league so far. So we have had the results like Frome. We've had results like yesterday when we didn't do too well against Marlow. But then again, we've had some stunner of results. I mean, going away to Merthyr, picking up a point there, that's a big point. We've got a 3-2 win over Swindon Supermarine. They can have been a little bit of a bogey team in the past. And what do you think the thoughts are going to be this year, Craig? Where are we going to end up come the end of the season?
Well, I'd like to say in the top two, but realistically, I think the Frome game, first game of the season, was always going to be difficult for whoever played it. When the side's promoted, they're on a crest of a wave. I think we've played some of the best football that I've witnessed in the 7 years I've been at the club. We have a small squad. We've played 2 games a week for the last 5-6 weeks, and that's going to take it out of any squad, whether you're Gosport, Borough, Totton, Walton and Hersham. We've done a hell of a lot of travelling in that time as well. We've driven to Merthyr, we've driven to Gloucester, we've driven to Oxford. Now, they don't seem that far away, but actually, if you take all the roadworks in, we were late for 2 of those games, having left in plenty of time. But also, you have to understand with the road closures what time the players are getting home. Before they go to work, all of our boys work. So actually, not only are they playing football, they're getting home late, getting up to go to work, doing another day's work where they've done a half a day's work before we leave to go to a midweek game. Those have always been issues, but they're issues that some people wouldn't have even thought about. So I actually think we've done fantastic. Joe and Pat have done fantastic because they've put this side together. And as I said, we've played some of the best football I've seen in the 7 years we've been here.
Well, on that, I was going to say, on that note, it does look like there's a really good camaraderie as well in this squad at this moment in time.
Yeah, and I think if you spend some time on a coach with these guys, you hear it, you see it. For me, they're all going out there with the passion. They're all playing for the shirt, and they're all playing for the supporters. But most of all, they're playing for the chairman, and so they get that, and that is one of the best things. But again, Joe and Pat deserve massive credit for that because they've put that squad together.
Well, definitely. And I do think it will be another good season. But Craig, this is the golden question. Will they be in the National League South next season? Yes or no? Only 2 words.
Well, I'm only going to say yes.
I like the answer. That is a perfect answer, Craig. And unfortunately, that question, it may have been hard, but I've got 3 more harder questions just to finish off this interview and wrap it all up. So you may have to think hardly about these 3 questions. The first one is, you've talked about you've seen some great games in your time, and I would imagine you have seen some great games. But what is your best game you've ever seen from Gosport Borough?
I think there's twofold to that. There's the best game due to the circumstances, and then there's the best game. So I will go back to a week where the club had to win 3 games in a week to stay up. And we won all 3 games. In the middle of the week, we travelled away to Dunstable. It was like a home game. It was a little bit what we're experiencing now with the level of fans there. Coaches of fans going to an away game at our level when we were bottom of the table at this point. Was amazing. We managed to win the game. That was an experience that only the people there can ever determine because of what it meant. We then went to win it, on the Saturday as well to stay up by 1 point. So that was amazing. The best game of football I think I've seen us play in the 7 years was away to Gloucester in the FA Cup.
Really?
It was the most professional performance I think I've seen from the club. Again, Joe and Pat well managed, but every one of those players went out there and probably overachieved, having just come off a game on the Saturday and the travel we had. So that for me would be up there in those 2 top games.
And it's interesting you mentioned about how really those 2 games, they were picked on almost like the scenarios. So the first one you said about how it was because Borough already stayed up, and I would imagine it may have a big part to play in this next question. But what is your favourite memory so far involving Gosport that you've sustained?
Favourite memory? I think my favourite memory would probably be the last game of last season, the semi-final loss at Salisbury, in the fact of how proud that made me feel of all the work that had gone in to get us to that stage. Yes, it was a terrible result, but we all know the result was not because of the way we played.
Yeah.
you know, but that would be my proudest moment as a Gosport secretary and fan and whatever else, because actually the passion that night from those players was amazing.
And I think it was a journey all throughout that season as well. It was just class. I love that season. And Craig, you probably, like you were saying, you've been in non-league for years, and I would imagine you'd be able to give some great advice for an aspiring young club secretary.
Yeah, don't do it.
Why did I know that answer was coming?
Listen, it is an extreme job, because you are the rules and regulations man. You are the people that managers, coaches don't like at certain times. You are the person that other people in the ground don't like at certain times. You know, but actually it's a rewarding job. It's a tough job. You know, it's 20 hours a week. You know, we have to do, for our level, we have to do all the same paperwork, all the same systems as the Premier League clubs.
Really?
Totally. You know, we sign players the same way, we put players on contract the same way, we use the online systems like they use. So as a volunteer, you still have to do all those things where people do it as their full-time job. I would say on average it's 20 hours a week. So for anybody wanting to do it, it's a fantastic job, it's a fantastic role. It takes a period of time to understand what you're doing, but it also allows you to become close to the runnings of a football club and part of the team that puts that team out on the field every week.
Well, I suppose if any youngsters would be interested, it gives them the perfect grounding if they did want to jump the leagues, maybe do it for a Premier League team one day. Oh, easier. You could just go down the media route and become a commentator like me. Very easy role. But yeah, I love it. I mean, I think every role at the club is just really great, and you make some great memories both on the pitch, and it's just a fun time at Gosport Borough. And Craig, I've got one final question. I've asked a few of the players this, but just imagine this: the scenes of us getting promotion come the end of the season. You get asked to do the karaoke. What song are you picking for it?
Mine's That Out of Hell.
Oh, nice one. Yeah, you know what? I rate that one. I've heard some dodgy shouts over the few podcasts I have done, but you know what? That's not one of the bad ones.
Yeah,
I bet
it goes on for a long time, and you have to listen to me, so you might listen then.
I think, well, maybe play it out on the coach ride if we don't get promoted. Torture some of the players for not doing it. I bet you've been tortured.
Years ago, I did it a few years ago as a coach.
Oh, really? Well, how did the players react to it and all the coaches?
At the time, he didn't have any choice, because it's still a bit like now, and the players are still doing it now. So,
do you get any dodgy singers ever on the coach? Any of the players?
I can't leave that information out.
Well, I think that's only fair, Craig. And it's been a brilliant episode. And do you have any final words to the Gosport fans listening at home?
Up the Borough?
Craig, that is perfect. The first person to say that. I'm so glad you knew. But you know how I'm going to end it as well. Final words from me and Craig. Up the Borough.